Testing, 1, 2, 3. Oh my gosh.
Hello.
Hello. Hi. Yay, we're on. Thank you guys so much for coming to our panel. We are learning and supporting the needs of the neurodiverse, BIPOC, LGBTQIA, and others, the whole alphabet soup. Neurodiverse, you asked. Does anyone in the audience know what neurodiverse is? Yes, thank you, my people. Okay, neurodiverse, for those folks who don't know what it is people who think outside of the box. See, it might be people, yes?
Diversion.
Well, actually, language changes, actually.
Yeah.
So language change, you could use neurodiverse, neurodiversity, neurodivergent, neuro whatever. But the meaning of it is people who think outside of the box. So, some people don't like using neurodivergent because they're like, I'm not divergent, I'm just diverse. So, but yes, noun, pronoun, whatever, right? So anyways, BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, People of Color, and LGBTQIA, the whole alphabet soup. And help me out here, Tara, it's
Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, also sometimes the Q is questioning.
Yes.
Questioning. And then there are other, probably 9 other letters we could throw on there, but it's just getting out of control.
So plus, exactly. So thank you guys for coming. Thanks for listening to us while we figure out the hiccups there. And we will have Leo here drawing. So let me introduce myself. My name is Lorraine Garrison. I am a school psychologist here in San Diego. I have Leo Griswold to my left here. He is a storyteller, producer, writer, the whole thing.
The comic book creator.
He has worked
filmmaker.
Yeah, DC, Marvel, a whole bunch of folks. And I have Buntarika Shripam here. She is a therapy-informed geek specialist, life coach, all sorts of wonderful things. And I have the wonderful Miss Tara Avery here at the end. She's the owner, founder, editor of Snack Ed Press, and story editor, writer, illustrator, the whole thing.
I also work with a nonprofit called Prism Comics. You can find this at table 2326. This year we sell all kinds of books and comics of LGBTQ, AIU, Alpha, Beta, Gamma,
The whole alphabet, guys. All of it.
We're working on Greek letters now, just like those.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Okay, so I'm going to give a little roadmap here. So we're going to talk about X-Men and why X-Men is important not only in the comic book world, but in pop culture. Why, X-Men was this huge thing, and hopefully it's making a comeback. That's what we're hoping for. And we'll talk about BIPOC experience, the LGBTQIA+, and neurodiverse folks, why representation matters, why the X-Men that we most relate to, and if you can guess who we each represent before we come up, then we might give some giveaways. Just saying, we've got some stuff here. And then we'll have resources, so please take out your phone. We're going to be giving you a whole bunch of resources. If you were in my panel yesterday, we had a whole bunch of stuff of organizations and websites and things like that. That'll be at the end towards the conversation. And here we go. Okay, so why it matters that we speak. Why has Comic-Con, thank you so much, Comic-Con, for inviting us to speak again. Why does it matter? It matters because marginalized groups have continued to struggle to be visible, to be seen, to be heard, to be understood. So if the more we are heard, the more it's likely that people will empathize with us, sympathize with us, because the world is not made for us. We do not think inside the box, we are not typical folks, and we want to reclaim our stories, our ideas, how many people know, just raise your hand out of curiosity, where does yoga come from? Does anyone know? You in the green shirt, tell me.
Well, it's Hindu form, it's part sacred and part for your own health.
Very good. Maybe it's because we're here in the geeky therapy kind of, interaction, but like, not a lot of people actually know that, right? So much
Can you
appreciated.
repeat her answer?
Oh, yes, repeat the answer, or do you want to, put your 2 cents in?
Oh, I don't have any sense.
Space where you talk about
Can you be closer to the mic?
Yeah.
Sorry, hearing impaired.
Sorry, it's related to Hinduism, incorporating the mind and the body, and that, it's a very spiritual activity to integrate all the chakras. And so it's been colonized and commodified and kind of repackaged into Indian yoga, and so it's a very painful thing to see once in a while, so.
Yes, so thank you. Yes, so we need to know where we come from, what inspires us, and so that's why representation matters and why we speak. So, the impact of generations throughout different media, that's what we'll talk about. It's uplifted, it's empowered folks, it's able to open up worlds of fictional and non-fictional. We'll get into this, and so it's empowered a lot of people who have been misunderstood. And we're excited about X-Men 97, the cartoon reboot coming out. Who's excited about that? All right, so thank you guys for helping us celebrate that. All right, Tara, you are up.
Well, my quote is from James Baldwin. It's one you've probably heard several times. We can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. And I think that that's something that is important for our times as well. Now, a little bit about me and where I come from and my personal relation to the X-Men before we get started is that I was, raised, by some very conservative parents. My father was born a sharecropper, and he grew up, to be a rather well-to-do businessman. And for him, the conservative Southern outlook and a no-nonsense attitude towards making money, he wasn't very pleased with the kid who exhibited queer tendencies and thought drawing comics was a cool idea for a job. So I was very much discouraged from both queerness and being a cartoonist from a very young age. These were things that were a double memoir to my father. And of course, as it was in the trucking industry, we would move from town to town quite regularly, and we went from Connecticut to Maryland to Boston to Kansas City, and wherever I landed, there were always comic books. And by the time I had reached that tender age of puberty, I had discovered X-Men, and I was beginning to get into it during the Chris Claremont run. And Chris Claremont run is very germane to our topic because it is the one that sort of begins to get into issues that are congruent with the LGBTQAIU experience. And my character is Rogue. And these are my favorite Rogue books, by the way. Paul Smith, Barry Windsor Smith, John Romita Jr. Smith, and but so we'll go right into it here. And just the X-Men as an allegory of queer experience. There were a lot of things in the X-Men about being a mutant, being an outcast, that were fairly consistent with being a queer experience. There's this innate genetic market that mutants have, but there's something that you can't separate from yourself. There's something you can't discard from yourself, your sexual attraction, your sense of your own gender, your very identity. So there was some congruence there between the mutant experience and the queer experience. In the Chris Claremont run, that these mutant abilities and these mutant characteristics often began to evidence themselves at the age of puberty. And this is when most queer kids are having their sexual awakenings and wondering why don't they seem to like the same people, be attracted to the same people their friends are attracted to. Every mutant's abilities are unique, and the diversity contributes to the strength of the team, in this case the X-Men, and in our case the diversity of our queer identities creates to build a stronger community, or leads to a stronger community. We're often rejected by our families and society, as the mutants were. They find their chosen family at Xavier's school for gifted youngsters, and we as LGBTQAIU people, we find our chosen family in the community. We often, embrace those people we find that share experience with us, to a greater extent than those that we have blood relations with. Also, this was probably the most notable and the most telling detail in the Chris Claremont X-Men is that mutants were hated. They were distrusted by the general public. and they were hounded by often conservative political and religious authorities. And he died, you know. Here we have a picture of Rogue being looked over by the defense experts at the Pentagon. You know. And similarly, in the 80s, the LGBT community suffered violence and oppression, and still does. Though let's at least be thankful that it's not nearly to the extent that it was back in those days. There was also another dynamic in the X-Men that sort of spoke to queer experience, and that was the sort of the two poles, poles of queer leadership that were embodied by Professor X and Magneto. Professor X was sort of more of an incrementalist. He wanted to work within the system, and he wanted to fight for acceptance and be a benefit to broader humanity. Peace with humanity was the goal, and that there was violence against humanity, was to be avoided at all costs. Something that does not play well 30 years later as a sort of a chosen tactic for queer people, but secrecy was a necessary defense. And the X-Men, had their X-Men identities that they showed to the world, their colorful costumes as Cyclops and Colossus and Rogue and what have you. But the nature of the school for gifted youngsters, well, it's just a boarding school, just where kids learn reading, writing, arithmetic, and physics, and biochemistry, and all these, maybe it's not a boarding school. So then you have, on the other hand, Magneto. Magneto just doesn't, will not trust humanity, will not trust these institutions, and a lot of these things you see how that some queer folks will not trust the straight world, will not trust institutions. He vowed that we should live openly and reject society's contempt. And here's where we diverge. The domination of humanity was the goal. You step up, you're proud, you engage, you fight, and your best defense is a good offense. You want the Homo sapiens world to be afraid of the Homo superior, and this is the sort of notion of queerness that be in your face, let everybody know, show it off, a pagan flaunting, if you will. And these were the two poles. And so the thing that made Magneto an interesting villain during this period of X-Men was that he was not just some mustache twisting baddie. He actually had some interesting things to say about how humanity treats its own. Then we have more detail. We have a line backwards. I can't do that. All right, here we go. So now we have Rogue, and Rogue is a character that I identify a lot with. She had all the classic superhero powers because she absorbed them from then Ms. Marvel, now Captain Marvel. Carol Danvers, she could fly, she was super strong, she was indestructible, and her primary power, as we all know, was the absorption of the abilities, memories, and identities of others. And her touch was lethal. That was her tragic problem. So here we have somebody that could not be harmed by bullets or crushed by a moving train, but she could not let anybody come into contact with her bare skin. And this is a sort of another analogous thing to queer experience. When you have feelings for somebody, and you know that by the nature of who you are, the nature of who they are, and the nature of the relationship that you want, you're not going to receive that touch. You're not going to get it back. You have to separate yourself. And I think that is something that is very telling with Rogue, and it also has, in the period that I read most of the X-Men in the 80s and a little bit into the 90s, that Rogue really did, touch upon a lot of the issues of the LGBTQAIU Alpha Beta Gamma Rho experience of the 1980s, and the Claremont run on X-Men, also really had parallels to the AIDS crisis through Rogue. AIDS crisis made physical intimacy risky, potentially lethal. Check, Rogue. Survivor's guilt was experienced by those who lost lovers, friends, and partners. Rogue was constantly experiencing guilt over the people whose identities she absorbed, and whose lives she ended inadvertently. Much as might be spreading HIV to people completely unaware, before we really understood what the virus was. There were political and religious authorities who pushed us aside and tried to demonize queer people. And Rogue was, as we saw in the previous panel, there was a special target of the Pentagon in the X-Men comics, and her known lethality was made her uniquely wanted among the X-Men. Also, another thing is that queer people's contributions to society were embraced, but queer people themselves were rejected. So you can see this in the superhero, like the sort of the classic trope of the superhero that is scorned by society, there's no gratitude, and this was definitely Rogue in spades. And this is why she's my favorite character. And if you're real nice and maybe answer a question later, I can give you an original.
Ooh, so one-on, original.
So, and that's my little road talk.
And now we have Leo. Leo has been drawing too, and so he's been drawing some originals over here. If you have like a great question, maybe we'll give some of those drawings away. Go ahead, Leo.
Yeah. Okay. So you know, I grew up as an immigrant. Me and my brothers, my sister. Oh, I just want to draw. Yeah, that's great.
You want to draw? Is that okay?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and draw as I'm talking. So, you know, I grew up. I was an immigrant. Me and my brothers, we all ended up in the entertainment industry. But that's a picture of me when actually there's another.
Can we switch back to the
Yeah.
PowerPoint? 'Cause-
Yeah, let's just go to the PowerPoint first. That way it would be easier to see
Okay.
the PowerPoint looks like.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So this is me. You know, so when I was a kid, I went back and forth between DC and Marvel. My first comic books were given to me by my uncle and my dad. And my dad wanted to become a comic book artist, but my grandfather said, no, you're not going to make any money. Typical with Asian, parents. So my dad became a CPA. We immigrated to the United States when we were kids, and comic books were the first thing that really resonated with me because I think my dad gave me like this copy of World's Finest, and it was Superman and Batman, and then the second comic book I ever got was from my uncle, or actually stack of comic books, which were Marvel's greatest comics, the Fantastic Four. And I guess they were reprints at the time. And so, but I was intrigued at this point. I was intrigued by Doctor Strange and Shang-Chi and Spider-Man, and that really resonated with me. But my first true love, first was the DC heroes. But then this time, I just thought this is cooler for now. And then I got involved in the X-Men. The X-Men were these characters where there was an energy to it. My uncle gave me these Chris Claremont, John Byrne comics, and I thought, what is this? This is so different. And so in my high school years, I was already drawing by this time, but my high school years, the only way to connect with people was through art, and I was also in show choir. I was in drama. I played basketball. I did everything. I was a musician, but I was one of those kids where I was both bullied and I don't know what to call it. Where you're popular with one group, with a clique, and yet they'll still bully you within the clique. And that's how I was. And so I was running for my life, especially during this time. I was about 14 years old when I drew these. I was really into George Perez and John Byrne, so I was copying like crazy. And so to keep the bullies away, I noticed that when I just started drawing, because I was so nervous, I was so scared that I needed something to anchor myself. I started drawing, and then I drew a crowd. And my bullies would not come near me because actually they were entranced because they saw me drawing. And then the crowd covered me. And it was almost like this magical thing where people were keeping these monsters away from you. And so that's how it was when we, growing up with me and my brothers. My brother is, my brother's an animator. He created a show called, I don't know if anyone's familiar with it, called Johnny Bravo. So, yeah. There you go, awesome. Yeah, my brother created that. That's our childhood.
Well, Leo, you have a lot of great things too, so let's
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
about
I didn't
your
mean to
things too.
Yeah, but just to give you a background, our family is very, I have a cousin who's a novelist as well, but we came from literally, we didn't have anything. And so, growing up, drawing was a skill for me primarily, not just drawing, but drama, because I'm a filmmaker now. So let's move to the next slide, actually. So what happened was art therapy. I started creating these worlds. They were parallel worlds to my world, and I think the best example would be Zack Snyder's Sucker Punch. And I go by, this is a fantastic reality ability. That is a way of coping for all of us, actually, who are newer divergent people who, for me, I have ADHD, I have hypersensitivity, I have synesthesia, I hear colors, so it's weird. And
It's not weird, you're just neurodiverse and we like.
yeah, I'm still grappling with that. And then I have dyslexia. So I have all these different problems that occur that when I was reading my Superman comics, originally I had this hopeful view. I grew up, watching these videotapes of Christopher Reeve, Superman and all those things. But then as I was progressing as a teenager and the adult, the X-Men comic books were helping me grapple with this reality, and it was especially with Wolverine. Wolverine was very edgy. He was very Asian to me because he looked Asian. Like Superman, Batman, Wolverine, all these guys had black hair. When I grew up, I tried, at one point I was a big Captain America fan until a kid said you could never be Captain America. You could never be the Flash, because Barry Allen had blonde hair. But Superman was kind of, I don't want to use an ableist term, but Superman was not cool. But growing up, Wolverine was that character who had to process so much grief, so much trauma. If you're living, especially as BIPOC, with blacks and Asians and Mexicans, Hispanics, we're disproportionately part of the military. I've never been in the military, but I have family, and so there's a lot of trauma in our communities. So fantastic reality ability allows us to create these worlds that are parallel to what we are going through, and then rewrite our histories. And that's what I love about comic books. What Wolverine did for me was amazing years later, was the fact that when you read like Dark Knight Returns and you read John Byrne's Man of Steel, and then the movies later on, Christopher Nolan and the Zack Snyder series, they are extensions of the original X-Men movie. It was everything that I wanted, because you're reading Jim Lee and that era of comics, and of course John Byrne was also great, but that redefined Superman and Batman. Like all of a sudden when you see Man of Steel, you're going, well, that's Wolverine. And when you're watching, Batman Begins, it harkens back to the first X-Men film. Well, Wolverine's got a backpack, he's walking around, and so I think Wolverine redefined my DC characters that I love so much, and I embrace that. Let's go to the next slide right here. So this is my wife, who just passed away a couple months ago. She passed away of cancer. And so part of it was we had these dreams of making a rock and roll movie together. We were writing. She was a publicist for a lot of big movies. She literally was worked to death. And this last year I ended up. Well, actually, I'll get to that in a moment. What we did was what she helped, because she's a liberal progressive. But she's also Christian, and which is really unique. And so she had this incredible perspective that helped me decolonize my mind. How many people are familiar with decolonization? Okay. Yeah, I didn't. I grew up very conservative parents. Now it's completely changed the last 4 years with my family. But we ended up decolonizing our minds, and I came to realize I was going through so much trauma, and she brought it out. She showed me. So part of this entire kind of therapy, art therapy, was to create our own world, because we, before she passed away, we found out she couldn't have a child. We got in a car accident and she already had these conditions. So what we did was, we started creating, like, this is the rock and roll movie I want to make, with me and her, and this is the sci-fi movie, and so I got back to doing that this last year during COVID. Next slide. So this is my best friend who just passed away last week, and that's my wife. This is us at Comic-Con. I had 6 friends that passed away from COVID this last year. I had another dozen people that died of different conditions like cancer, and then my wife that passed away with cancer. 2 of my friends who were in my rock and roll movie that I'm struggling to finish right now died of COVID, so I can't, it's hard to kind of finish that. But my perspective in writing and storytelling completely changed because my wife got me involved in, years ago, in loving global cinema. And I got into La Talante, I got into Fellini and Truffaut and all these other great, Mario Bava, Giallo, I mean, you name it. We were completely into that. So my perspective completely changed, and so I was resonating more with films like, recently that came out, Last Night in Soho, which is, complete, like Giallo, I love Giallo. So, and then reassessing things like Zack Snyder's Justice League, or, his version of Justice League, The Man of Steel. In the Asian community, why that and Chloe Zhao's Eternals, that is something because the representation, like Henry Cavill's Superman is my story, and that's me as an immigrant. It nailed the immigrant experience. It nailed all those things, and it's hard because Christopher Reeve was in our conversations. It was always like, oh man, this is the model minority. We could never live up to that. If we walked into a room, no one's going to look at us as the embodiment of hope. But Man of Steel, he walks in the room and it's like, oh, you're the cause of the problem. Now we distrust you, especially as an Asian. That made a lot more sense. And how much more time do I have? Okay, go. Anyway, so in finale, so my perspective changed in that way. So I'm very conscious of microaggressions towards us, because my grandmother, when I was a kid, they used to attack us. One minute. They used to attack us, and so when I see the Asian hate that goes on, I remember my grandmother being attacked. Especially that I get triggered when I watch Batman vs Superman or Man of Steel. Their parents are getting, his mom's getting attacked, and for us in the Asian community, that's us. We're very conscious of the biases and the changes, and even something like Shang-Chi, in comparison, now I even see like, sometimes they'll look at us and they'll see us complaining about why is Shang-Chi not acceptable, which I love, but the Shang-Chi I grew up with was he was, women loved him. He was a secret agent. He was an Asian superhero. James Bond, and
He was a sex object.
Was that?
Oh, Shang-Chi was a sex object.
Yeah, it was just, I don't want to say that Asian males are objectified, but we want to be looked on like every capital. We want to be looked on in that way, and so Shang-Chi, there are some problems, and we can talk about that later. But anyway, because that'll be the question answer. But I loved it. I still loved it, but I loved Black Panther more because it addressed the issues that should have been in Shang-Chi. But anyway, let's move on.
Thank you so much, Leo. I love having Leo on panels because he's got so much to say, and it's so interesting, especially coming from an artist perspective, right? So, as a school psychologist, I look at things differently. So it's wonderful to have these conversations with him. So the character I related to the most, I love the X-Men. I grew up with it. I read Excalibur. But the one that I want to talk about today is I want to talk about Shadowcat, Kitty Pryde. That's who I'm dressed up as today. Yay, thank you. I love that there's fans out there. the quote that I'm going to use today is, I used to think that the worst thing in life was to end up alone, but it's not. The worst thing in life is to end up with people who make you feel alone. And I feel that wraps up Kitty Pryde. So if anyone knows who Kitty Pryde is, Kitty Pryde, her power is phasing through things, you know, essentially being invisible. She had many arcs and many storylines, her love with Colossus and all of those things. But the one thing that I want to talk about is how she was very much in love with Wolverine. She looked up to Wolverine, and so I'm jumping off of Leo's talk here, and that you know, Wolverine in all of his wild ways made Kitty Pryde feel seen. So I grew up on the island of Guam. So there's not a lot of AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander representation, and so it's really nice to be able to talk to folks that are like that, that are similar to me, that understand that island lifestyle, culture. And what makes me unique is that I grew up in a household that my father is Black and my mother is Vietnamese, and at the age of 27 I found out that my father is not my biological father. And so, you know, in my roots and when I talk about things, I, you know, bring these different aspects. In the last panel I was at, we talked about Lovecraft Country, which I thought was a great show. And the reason why it's a great show, and I recommend it, it's on HBO, it's not, you know, safe for kids, not safe for work kind of thing. Yes, yes. It's because, to put it in a nutshell, the reality is, you know, growing up, what was scarier? Was it the racism or the fake monsters that were out there? And to be honest, it was the racism. So, I mean, like, and this is why we love comic books. This is why I love coming here to San Diego Comic-Con, because we are able to look at ourselves in these comics and learn these types of trauma, and that we can relate to that. Like, growing up as a kid, my dad would give me a comic book and a piece of bubble gum, and that's how I learned how to read. I learned how to read through Batman. I learned how to basically, you know, relate to folks because of comics and comic books. And so, you know, comics has always been that forefront, for me at least, in what I see in pop culture of the civil rights movement, right? Some people say that X-Men, the fight between Professor Xavier and Magneto was like how Malcolm X and MLK were fighting, and then later on, you know, Stanley and
Jack Kirby.
Jack Kirby, thank you. You know, they went back and they said, yes, it was influence, but you know, you and I had that conversation where, you know, that
It's evolving.
Yeah, it's evolving, right? So was X-Men created because of that, or were they influenced? You know, that's debatable. But you know, people found that allegory within X-Men. You know, we as people of color have identified as being other, being mutants, but X-Men allowed that to be a superpower. And that's my point, is that you know, thank you guys for coming here. I will pass the mic on to, and this is me, but you know, if you guys want to take a picture of it, but we'll get back to that.
Yeah.
But let's go ahead, Goody.
Hello, I'm Booney. So I resonate with Jean Grey and Phoenix. I'm gonna read the quote.
You got this, girl. I got you too. Yes!
The quote that I chose that resonates with me is, "The child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth." And that's an African proverb. Gets circulated often online. So I think we did a timeline of the chronological order of which fandoms we resonated with, and I watched the cartoons growing up with my siblings and my cousins. But here's a little bit about me first. So I am neurodivergent. What you would call twice exceptionally gifted, an asynchronous learner. So those smart kids that score really high on those standardized tests, but then they don't know where they left their glasses all the time, or they forget to eat all day. That's me. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of people here who are asynchronous, twice exceptional. So because of that, my parents were really scared. They didn't understand what to do with me because I was really, really clumsy, and some examples of my clumsiness included one time I was walking down the stairs and I skipped 6 steps and landed on my knees. I fell out of my truck at a convention one day and I had bloody knees going to the convention, and I went to go see my favorite author. His name is Dan Siegel, with bloody knees. And I just keep on seeming to have bruises everywhere because I don't have this spatial awareness. I'm just always in my head and thinking about ideas and concepts, and so that's like one snapshot of potential sensitive, clumsy, neurodivergent person. And because of that, my parents took me down on the stairs. They sat me down. They're like, "We're really worried about you. You're so gentle. You're so sensitive. Like, we're really afraid that the world is going to just swallow you whole, and we're so afraid that you're going to get destroyed by the reality of what life has to offer." And I didn't understand what they meant. And so I've still lived with this philosophy that kindness and gentleness and sensitivity is really important, and yet I know the world is really harsh and mean. And because of that, I have been a loner for a really long time. I know me and Leo have talked a lot about being different, and I would share like, oh God, like, oh.
I got you, girl. I got tissue.
Because I was so different, I would sit between the buildings by myself at school, and then like I had a twin brother, and he would like check in on me and say like, "Why are you hiding between the buildings? Like, what are you doing?" Like, I don't know. I'm just scared of people. I'm really, really scared. I don't know why. I can't read social cues, and it's been really hard. And so
Thank you for sharing.
And because of this, I have a really big like attunement to the sensitive child, the sensitive adult, those who are so withdrawn and feel like the world has forgotten them, given up on them. Like, I feel your pain, I feel so much of that. And so I incorporate that into my work. I used to be a school counselor, and I would work with the weird kids and the loners and the people that the parents or the staff didn't understand how to work with them. And so I'm really honored to be here on this panel because when I was little, I didn't identify with Jean Grey because I had internalized colorism. I felt like, well, I don't have the same skin tone. I don't feel like I'm allowed to be her. And so I had to fight that within myself to claim, like, I feel like Jean Grey. I feel like in the cartoon, she's clumsy all the time. Like, she passes out all the time. I used to pass out all the time as a kid. And she would like exert some mental, emotional energy, and she would like always pass out. It was so funny. And that's like what it feels like as me as a child. Like, that was my escape, and it meant a lot about possibility, because when you're a loner, when you're alone a lot, when people don't understand you, that's all you have. All you have are the heroes in the cartoons that you hope one day could be you. And it was really powerful to have that. And then looking back as an adult, I work a lot with archetypes and personality psychology. And for me, whatever heroes you resonate with, everyone has an archetypal profile. The heroes that you identify with are really inside you. Those heroes speak your truth. And so for me, when I think about Jean Grey and the Phoenix, that's all of us in this room. We have a Phoenix rebirth story we've already done it, or we're going to do it again and again until we become where we always have been. And so my wish as to be Jean Grey resonated with hoping someone like Professor X would come and mentor me and uplift me and tell me there's nothing wrong with you. You're perfect as you are. You have these gifts. Maybe the systems you were working in didn't know how to nurture you, but now I do. I see you, and there's nothing wrong, so let me help you become your best self. But while that happens, we go through a phase where we become the Dark Phoenix, where we become angry, we become resentful. We want to burn the world down because everyone who didn't understand us, they hurt us, they pushed us away, they made us feel shame for who we were. We felt so small and unimportant. And all those marginalized communities that we belong to, we've all felt this way. We wish that if the world only understood us and our stories, we wouldn't want to feel like we had to destroy everything that hurt us in the first place. And so when you come back to this and you accept that this is anger and rage is very valid, you come back to this place where your emotions are a strength. You can empathize with other people who have struggled because you know what it feels like to be marginalized. And you can use this to nurture your own communities. The journey does take time. It takes a lot of falling apart. And when you picture the phoenix rising from the ashes, parts of what we do here as we work together and the work that we do to empower our communities involves burning off the things that no longer serve us. Sometimes we get weighed down by all the messages that people have told us. They told us that we're wrong, that we're mutants, we're bad. We keep that with us, but when we get rebirth, it is now our choice to take it away. We don't need it anymore, but it did shape us for a long time. So my message to Jean Grays and everyone who loves them and everyone here is that, again, the world is not made for us. We're told that we sometimes seek external validations from other people, the ones that who shape the greater narrative, right? And we believe the lies. We believe that that's how we're supposed to be. And so the whole part of coming back through our Phoenix journeys is we come back to who we are. There was nothing wrong with you in the first place, but sometimes the whole life journey is just to realize that truth. And it really does help to have these communities and fandoms to support, to remind us again, there's nothing wrong with you.
You don't have to be invisible. So our message to all of you folks out there, for our gifted youngsters, oldsters, however you may be, your fandom matters, your community matters. There's nothing wrong with being different. You know, you might feel like a mutant, but you're not. We love you, we see you, right? Community exists, you can find it, you can create your own, you can find mentors, you can channel your own heroes, use these strengths to find your journey of who you are. Your fandom matters, you matter, and whatever you're struggling, we will find you, or you can find us. And so we have a lot of resources for you guys here. Please take out your phones. This is websites, organizations. If you're not feeling connected, especially coming through COVID, and you know, what's this new normal? Like, what does this look like? If you need a gamer group, a D&D group, you know, there's something for somebody out there. You know, don't feel alone because you're not. There's somebody out there that resonates with you. You might be, you know, Pacific Islander and like the X-Men, and you know, or you know, you might be, I don't know, like what group, like any group, and find.
Disabled people too.
I'm sorry?
Disabled.
Yes, absolutely. You know, physically, mentally, whatever, you know, there are groups out there. All right, we're gonna do, here are books and more books. I highly recommend My Grandmother's Hand by Resmaa Menakem. And so this is talking about the somatic trauma experience that we hold inside our bodies, especially being a person of color, generational trauma coming from, you know, ancestors of slavery and things like that. You know, this is a very powerful book in that sense, talking about that. Superhero Therapy, like that's another great book by Dr. Scarlett. Oh, thank you, yes, and someone who recognizes that. Dr. Scarlett has written great books about their hero's journey. Another slide, therapy groups. Here are lots of therapy groups, guys. Trans Family Support Service. Anyone here representing Kathy? Are you here? No, she's not here. So she's another person I like reach out to with all of my kids and families who need that support. All right, I'm gonna go to the next slide. Got it? Everyone got that picture? Okay, great. And here are some of our resources of what we're talking about in the X-Men and civil rights and the lost interview with Stan Lee, you know, that debate. And